If you want to see really good personnel up front for the Giants, well, let me introduce you to Dexter Lawrence and his friends. The Giants defense is they've got some dudes on that side of the ball. Obviously, Kevin O'Connell and Justin Jefferson and crew did a great job last week to be able to handle it. They were able to neutralize what they needed to neutralize, get JJ the ball where they needed to. He got in the end zone. Everybody gritty. If you're ask you the same question, but now you're Kliff Kingsbury. What's the scouting report for this New York Giants team this week, and where does it start?
Yeah, for me, it starts with, obviously, Dexter Lawrence. We'll get to him in 1 second, but Shane Bowen is the new defensive coordinator there. So it feels so much different than it did last year. Last year, it's like the craziest, most unsound pressures, and you're just like, this guy is, this can't be like a real thing we're seeing because they're just bringing everybody, and this guy's looping in the same gap, and just bombs over Baghdad. Comparatively, this is an extremely conservative defense. It feels very similar to like Bill Belichick from like 2005. You know what I mean? It's like, we're going to play quarters, we're going to play a little cover 2, we're going to play 6, we're going to match. And then much like Belichick, they are a little bit of a game plan team. So they're going to kind of say like, what do you do well? How do we take it away? And I think that's going to be a really interesting chess match between Kliff. Like, what is he like if I'm Kliff, I'm thinking, what does he know about us based on week 1? How do I prevent him from taking that away? Like Jaden's scrambling ability, like, are they going to change their rush path? Are they going to blitz more? Are they going to use a spy? Like if I'm Shane Bowen after watching last week, I'm throwing in some of those pressures that they ran in Tampa Bay just to see if we got it locked up. You know what I mean? We had some free runners. We had some issues with some line stunts in terms of Wiley and Cosme on different levels. Like, let's throw that at them, see if they got it fixed. And so if I'm Kliff, I'm like, okay, how do we do that? What coverages gave us an issue? How do we beat man-to-man? Because we had a little bit of an issue. Jaden did in certain situations with that. So I would expect maybe a little bit more than last week, but I'd say at its core, the defense is a little bit simpler. Like they're going to have a wrinkle for you, but on the whole, it's a little bit simpler. So I think that's advantageous for Jaden Daniels. Now, you mentioned the front, and like, Dexter Lawrence, I know he doesn't get talked about in the same way as like Chris Jones and Micah Parsons, but he statistically is one of the most dominant defensive players in the NFL over the last 3 years. And like when you watch the game, you watch Minnesota's offense, like he's creating sacks, he's creating TFLs, like he just is able to do a lot. And when you look at his body type, it doesn't make a lot of sense because he's 6'5", he's 350. He doesn't move. He's not like lightning quick. He's just a bear. Like I've never seen a guy consistently overpower offensive linemen the way he does and just push the pocket and create pressures. So to me, he's the problem. And I know people talk about Burns on the edge and Kayvon Thibodeau, and I think they're very good athletes, but they haven't, to me, lived up to the name just yet. Like I know Kayvon Thibodeau had 10 sacks last year. I think 6 of them were against third-string offensive linemen, like just from different teams because of injury things over the course of the season. Against good players, he doesn't really show up. That's not to say he won't.
Yeah, he also, for whatever reason, had Charles Leno's number. Like that was just a great matchup for him.
Like he just had a good feel for it, for sure.
Yeah.
And then, obviously Burns, like, is this guy that has this great reputation because LA was going to trade 2 first-round picks for him a couple years ago. He's got athletic pass rush juice. It doesn't always kind of lead to production. And I was talking to someone about that. It's like, how do you kind of weigh and scout those guys? And they were like, well, because of Dexter Lawrence, it changes their dynamic because Dexter's going to push the pocket. The quarterback's going to want to step back, and you're going to get a lot more sacks of those guys running high on the edge, which I didn't even think about. Because of that one guy in the middle's ability to disrupt. So I think that's something that I'm definitely going to be watching because Jaden, the one fumble that he had, you can say the first one, where he lateral fumble, whatever.
Right.
The one that he had like at the 40-yard line, he gets a little bit of pressure internally. He steps back in the pocket and the ball gets out. And I think like you got to be hyper aware because it's going to like that's how their pressure is going to feel almost every time. Pressure up the middle because he's really good, Dexter, and those guys are just racing to that spot. So don't step back. And how do we handle that if as a young player, kind of dealing with different rush patterns?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I kind of noticed the more I watched last week back too is, and this was kind of his rep coming in. Battis is really, really solid, but he's not the strongest guy in terms of moving people. And obviously trying to move Vita Vea is a task that nobody can accomplish. And Dexter Lawrence, like that just sucks if you're Tyler Battis. You sign with the Commanders, you're like, okay, cool. I'm excited. DQ was my guy in Dallas. All right, let's see what this schedule looks like. cool. Weeks 1 and 2, I get Vita Vea and Dexter Lawrence.
Yeah.
What?
Two of the best like pure noses in
right.
the NFL.
You don't see many nose tackles, period. And then you get those two jokers back to back weeks 1 and 2. So what can Kliff and Bobby Johnson do to help Battis out, not only in the pass rush situations, but also if one of the solutions is going to be to run the football, to make sure they can get the movement that they need up front, because Vea was able to kind of stunt some of that stuff last week just because he's so freaking big and hard to move.
Well, we'll say the one thing that I thought Tyler Battis had a pretty good game. I'm not saying, I agree that like that's a tough matchup, but
it's not like he lost a ton. It's just like he's going to move people in a way later this year when it's not Vita Vea, in a way that he was not able to move Vita Vea because Vita Vea is an actual mountain of a man.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying. I think I just wanted to point out so fans aren't thinking that he's playing bad, but
right.
It's like what I would say the thing about Tampa Bay that's tough is they're always moving around. Like in the front, they're always stunting, and the Giants don't, at least in the first game. And again, they might be like, oh, that was really successful. Let's stunt more, right? But at least based on what we saw week 1, they didn't stunt a lot. And so when you know kind of your landmarks and your targets, it's a little bit easier to overtake. And I will say this about Dexter Lawrence, the way he's playing the nose, like Vita Vea is a little bit more aggressive up the field, just a little bit. Dexter plays it pretty square, like he's like a true read player almost. And I think that, and it's surprising he's so effective as a pass rusher, because you'd be like, that shouldn't work. But because of that, he's not firing off the line of scrimmage. So usually that lets the center, especially a quick kind of not undersized center, but a quicker center like Battis, get the snap off and get into him before he can really get going. So there's times like, even though again Dexter Lawrence is one of the better defensive players in the NFL, where guys can sink double teams on him really well. They're not creating this great vertical movement, but they can sink the double team and at least get him off the spot in a way that you're not going to see with Vita Vea, because Vita Vea is going to stunt from the nose to the opposite A. He's going to stunt from the shade to the B. And he just, because of that movement, it makes it harder to really sink those doubles. So I think this matchup generally favors, but that type of stuff, those little details, also favor the Commanders as opposed to week 1, which was pretty tough.
Obviously, the weakest point, relatively speaking, of the Giants' defense is on the back end. How does Kliff take advantage of that, and what specific matchups do you like for Washington if they can get the protection and all the stuff up front? Right.
Yeah, well, I think the thing when you look at the depth chart for the Giants, and when you watch him play, I think Banks is a good player, good athlete, good physicality, but he's young. Nabin from Minnesota, the guy they drafted from Minnesota, rookie. He's a rookie starting safety. Yeah. No, Nubin. Yeah, thank you. So in the other corner starts with an F, Flott, something like that. Yeah. He also a young player. So they have, again, some of the same issues the Commanders have. They have in the back end. So what I would do is I would be like, how do we test your rules? Like, how do we make sure you're lining up correctly to a bunch, to a motion? Like, what's happening there? And I think when you watch the Minnesota game, you were talking about how how effectively that game was called by Minnesota's staff. Like, a lot of it is they're shifting, they're motioning, they're getting good matchups, they're hitting stuff on the move. And I think there's an element of that. So, I've talked about how Kliff in training camp had more motions, had more shifts. I think this would be a decent game. I'm not saying go shift motion crazy. It needs to be every play. But, in critical down and distance, like, let's see if you're paying attention. Let's see if you were paying attention in the install on Monday, or on Wednesday if you're the Giants secondary guys. And again, they have not played a lot of football together. So how do they communicate certain things? Like, test those rules the way that Tampa Bay tested us week 1. So I agree. I think they've got some good athletes in the back end. I think the nickel player is a good player. The kid from Kentucky, they've got
Andrew Phillips.
They've got some good football players back there, but like, they're young. So let's make them work for it a little bit and see what they know and test their communication skills a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting too. You talk about them not playing a lot of football together. I was just clicking through a couple of plays in NFL Pro, and they have who's on the field for each one, and like they even mixed up their corners last week. Like, you got some Adoree Jackson, you got some Deontay Banks, you got some Cordell Flott, you got some Tyler Nubin, you got some Andrew Phillips. So like they had a bunch of guys go in and out of the game last week. So you talk about those reps together. There's only so much that they've stacked those through week 1 in a new defense, and can they take advantage? I was gonna say let's go go a little bit deeper to wrap up here on some of the motion and that kind of stuff, because that's that becomes one of the big things. Like, Terry lined up on the left 87% of the time. Oh, they only use motion so much. I do wonder sometimes when some of that stuff is auto-populated, only because I felt like Kliff actually used a decent amount of motion, not like a ton. And it's not as intentional as like McDaniels, right? Like there's some of those like jet motions and those short motions right before the snap. Kliff's is more of like, hey, we're going to line up here. All right, jog across motion. Let's see if we can get a man zone read. Like, it's a lot of information gathering. But I sorted NFL Pro. Sorry, NFL Pro. There's at least one mistake in your sorting mechanism, because it was like only 9 plays with motion. And then I was like, okay, let me go to the plays that don't have motion. And the first one I watched had motion. So I don't know what the actual percentages was, but I feel like there was a little bit more than maybe some of the numbers would suggest, based off of the fact that if it's being calculated off what I just described, then they missed at least one. But point being, Logan, that it was week 1. There is more in the bag. We have seen some like full formation shifts. We have seen some jet motions, and we didn't see any end arounds or jet sweeps last week either. That's certainly in based off what we saw in training camp as a possibility. So how, like, does, I guess the fan version of this question would be like, does Kliff need to do some of that stuff that guys like McDaniel and Shanahan and O'Connell are doing, or is he able to accomplish it through other methods, like some of the similar stuff that is more in line with how Kliff's like the identity of who Kliff is as an OC?
Yeah, so I think if you're calling or designing a play, you got to ask why you would motion. Don't just motion to motion. Like, I think, when Scott Turner was here, like, I think they were like the 3rd team in terms of motion usage in the NFL, the Commanders. It was something like insanely high. Maybe it was like top 10. And everyone's like, oh, that means it's a healthy offense. That's a sign of a good offense. But there wasn't that intentionality you were talking about, like with the motion. It was like, oh, we're going to bring this guy back. And it's like, why are we doing it? Like, what's the point? So I don't want to motion to motion, because motion does create convoluted looks, or it can create a lot of convoluted looks in the secondary. When it's a static picture, I know where everybody's at. So I think that's the thing, is like, we talked about it last year with Sam Howell and Eric Bieniemy. It's like, maybe Sam doesn't want a motion. Maybe he has a hard time seeing it. And so if you're doing, like, why are you doing it? What's the motivation behind the motion? I think that's always what fans have to ask themselves. If it's just like when you watch Mike McDaniels, every motion is doing something, right? I'm going to motion out. You got to expand with me because you're backing up. That little out underneath is always there for you, right? Like, whatever it is. I think you can do stuff formationally that'll give you similar results to motion. I personally think motion is very effective. Again, my background is in this like West Coast Kyle Shanahan. We're going to move around, test you guys all the time, but you can do stuff formationally from a personnel standpoint to test them too, right? So for example, if we put a running back, a receiver, and a tight end in a bunch, who is in the bunch now? Who's in the coverage? If we're playing man coverage, I probably have a linebacker, a safety, and a corner. But if we cross release, then we cannot just play straight man on that, because we're going to get picks. So, like, now I've got a running back on a corner, I've got a receiver on a linebacker, and a tight end on a safety again, or whatever, however that works out. And that's an advantage for us offensively. So I think there needs to be enough variety, like tight bunches, full splits, motions and shifts, to keep the defense unsettled. Like, what you don't want is a settled defense. And there are multiple different ways to do that. Like, even getting in 4-by-1, like Kliff did a couple times in the game, like, that is not a conventional look. And you're going to have a lot of communication about where we need to go to, like, make sure we're matching that effectively, right? And not leaving this poor corner on the backside one-on-one. So I think there's a couple different things. Again, I think a little bit more motions probably in the future, maybe not this week, but definitely I'd say in the next 4 or 5 weeks, you'll see more motion from Kliff as Jaden Daniels gets more comfortable, as he gets a better feel for the defense. Because that's the other thing, is sometimes early in the season, you don't know what the defense's answer is versus motion. And you don't want to get them out of a good look because you're trying to motion. If that makes sense, right? Let's say
you line up, you get what you want, and now we've motioned and ruined it.
Yeah, or like we're motioning to the look we want, right? But they don't play it the same way, or it confuses the defender so bad that he's in the throwing window. You don't want that sometimes, right? Like, it's not always advantageous. So I think as Kliff gets more comfortable with the responses to motion, as he gets more comfortable with what Jaden knows, I think that'll increase. But I think in the meantime, you'll see stuff like personnel-wise bunch, full width stuff, overloads pre-snap. That'll be probably a staple. And then as they get more comfortable in motion, we'll probably sprinkle a little bit more.
All right, that is our preview show for this week. Again, our next show will be from Northwest Field on Sunday night. I'll get it right eventually. Actually, I haven't really messed it up that much. It'll be from Northwest Field on Sunday night. That's the point.
I mess it up every day.
Well, now that I have to talk about it a little bit more because they're actually at home this week, there's probably a good chance that wasn't the last time that I messed it up. But yeah, we'll be there on Sunday. Logan, of course, will be on the sidelines for the radio broadcast. I'll be up in the press box, and then we will convene after I hit the post-game locker room for our post-game show. That'll be live on YouTube at the Team 980 at 106.7 The Fan and on my page at Craig Hoffman. And then it'll be in your podcast feed immediately after. We're not waiting for Monday morning anymore. So as long as you're subscribed to one of those places, you will get it as soon as we are done. And then we're back at it next week. Tuesday film, Thursday preview. Although, Logan, we have to wait a little bit extra for the game next week as week 3 is Monday Night Football in Cincinnati. Yeah. So we'll see what we do with that. But the podcast schedule won't change. But just waiting. Sunday we'll just sit around and watch football all day. That'll be fun. Nice, relaxing. Nice relaxing day of watching nothing but ball. And until then, everybody have a great weekend. Enjoy the game. Enjoy your anticipation, waiting for the game. And thanks for watching and listening to Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.